All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of Daily December 2021. This is day 5. So, um, first, a very quick reminder update kind of thing. This Wednesday, starting at 9 p.m. Central Time, I'm going to be running a one-shot adventure from the RPG system The Strange. Um, it's based on the Cypher RPG system. It's really, really cool. If you are interested in participating in that, comment here or go to Twitter. I'm at Trainer Jody on Twitter. My DMs are open. And you can just direct message me on Twitter and go, hey, I'm interested. I've already had one person already say, hey, I'm interested in playing. And barring, any issues happening between now and the actual game, they will be playing. And I think I have 2 other people that have mentioned they'd be willing if nobody else shows up because they're regular players of mine. So if you are interested, like I said, let me know ASAP. Because, yeah, it's going to be weird and fun, and everyone's going to learn a new system together. So it should be fun. Okay, cool. So, with that out of the way, I've been meaning to make a video about this for a while now. And for some odd reason, I feel like I've made this video before. And if I have, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. Because as I have mentioned quite a few times, my memory is absolutely horrible. And when I say that, I don't mean it's like, oh, I have a bad memory. I mean, due to issues with some of my mental disorders, and medication that some of the known side effects affect memory. I quite literally have a horrible memory and cannot remember large portions of my life. It really, really sucks. So, again, if this is something I've said before, ignore it. I find it really, really fascinating as a topic. So I'm going to say it again. And the topic I would like to talk about today is the difference between rules heavy systems, and in this particular instance, I'm going to be referencing Pathfinder and D&D 3.5, compared to rules light RPGs like 5th edition did Dungeons and Dragons. And this kind of epiphany I've had since I almost, I guess it's been a year now. Last year for Daily December, I got, and it's under a bunch of books here, and the books are weighing down the shelf, so I'm not gonna get it out. But I have I have not only the Pathfinder 2nd edition core rule book, which is a doozy of a book. It is like this thick. It is well, there we go. It is like this thick. It is a massively thick book. And then I also have the physical 2E bestiary as well. And last year I went, you know what? I wanna kind of check out Pathfinder 2nd edition. I'm not a fan of 1st edition Pathfinder, mostly because I'm not a huge fan of of D&D 3 and 3.5, and Pathfinder is D&D 3.5. The thing with Pathfinder, the thing that some people don't realize about Pathfinder is, sorry, it's up on my glasses. It's driving me nuts. Pathfinder was created from the 3rd edition SRD, the System Reference document. They actually made the basic building blocks of D&D 3rd edition open source. And I believe any game that was developed under it was required to list that they were created under, I think it was called the D20 license. But basically, there are tons and tons and tons of RPGs that are basically different flavors of D&D 3rd edition. If you ever played Star Wars. What's it called? This is Star Wars SWTOR. Knights of the Old Republic. There we go. If you ever played Knights of the Old Republic, Knights of the Old Republic actually used a tabletop Star Wars system that was built under the D20 license. So Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic is literally Star Wars D&D. If you look at the system, if you look at the feats and everything, like how you level up your character, that is how D&D 3rd edition worked. With all the different masteries, and some of the feat names are actually the exact same names. How they handle dual wielding and all those other things. That literally Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic is Star Wars D&D. It's what it is. And Pathfinder was the same thing. They took D&D 3rd edition and they took the basic rules of D&D 3rd edition, and then they made some slight modifications for ease of use and things like that, and that's what became Pathfinder. And for a brief moment in time, Pathfinder was the most played RPG in the sphere, and the reason it was is because it was D&D, but it was still being supported, whereas Wizards of the Coast had stopped supporting D&D 3rd edition and had moved on to 4th edition. Now, a lot of the problems people had with 4th edition were made up. They were completely imaginary, fabricated problems that didn't actually exist. And then there was another large group of people that just didn't like D&D, not because of fabricated problems that didn't exist with it, but because it wasn't 3rd edition. They liked 3rd edition, and anything that wasn't 3rd edition, they didn't like. And I'll have an entire rant on 4th edition. Probably I've had it before. I'll probably do it again. I like talking about 4th edition. But that's why Pathfinder became successful, because literally it was D&D that was still supported. It was all it was it was D&D that was still getting things. Anyone that tries to claim, well, no, it's the superior, it wasn't. It does make some quality of life changes that I think, had 3rd edition and 3.5 continued to go on, Wizards of the Coast would have done it too, because there are some things in there that make a little bit of sense. But for the most part, Pathfinder runs into the same problems I have with 3rd edition, which is there are too many rules and there are too many things to learn. And 2nd edition Pathfinder really leaned super, super hardcore into it. And to give you a really good example, and I just thought of this, so I actually have to go up and because I have a PDF copy that I got at the same time as the Pathfinder starts with P. There we go. There we go. That I got at the same time as the physical one, because I'm that kind of person. Good. See the page level. I need to go to. Do you have bookmarks in here? Are you guys awesome? Yes, you are. I need to go to weapons. Okay. All right. So, I am going to bring up something really, really simple that explains this really, really well for me. I'm sorry this is just so boring. I promise I will get to something that actually makes sense. Okay. All right. So, we're going... my word. So we're going to look at the dagger in Pathfinder 2nd edition and the dagger in D&D 5th edition. And this is really going to kind of give you an example of why I think it's just not it's just complexity for complexity's sake. So, the dagger, which is one of the dagger is one of the most simple weapons in the game. There's really not too many more that are more simple than this. When you look at the traits, Pathfinder Second Edition calls them traits. Fifth Edition calls them properties. The dagger, which is one of the most simple weapons in the game as far as traits are concerned, has 4 traits. It has the agile trait, the finesse trait, the thrown 10 feet trait, and the versatile S trait. So what do any of those things mean? Well, I'm going to tell you. Agile. The multiple attack penalty you take with this weapon on the second attack of your turn is -4 instead of -5, -8, and -8 instead of -10 on the third and subsequent attacks in the turn. Okay. Then we have finesse. Finesse is a little bit easier because it's basically the same in both of them. Finesse. You can use your dexterity modifier instead of your strength modifier on attack rolls using this melee weapon. You still use your strength modifier when calculating damage. So one of the things I didn't like about 3rd edition was finesse just meant you could hit with it better, but it still required strength to be able to do damage with it, which I think is pointless. At that point, why even use dexterity? Well, they find other ways to force you to use dexterity anyways. Thrown 10 feet. Should be fairly simple, but let's talk about it. Thrown. You can throw this weapon as a ranged attack. A thrown weapon adds your strength modifier to damage just like a melee weapon does. When this trait appears on melee weapons, it includes the range increment. Ranged weapons with this treat the range increment specified in the weapon's range entry. So it means you can throw it for to 10 feet. Which actually means a dagger in Pathfinder is less useful than a dagger in 5th edition, because a dagger in 5th edition can technically be thrown up to 60 feet, whereas this one can only be thrown 10 feet. And I'm actually not 100% certain about how range works in 2nd edition. I would assume the 10 feet has got to be the short distance, and there has to be something you can do for throwing it beyond that range. So I would assume you can throw it further than 10 feet. There's just some sort of floating modifier penalty, because that's how they do things in this. Someone that's actually knowledgeable in how those work, let me know in the comments down below. And then versatile S, which is actually not one I'm familiar with. So QRSTUV, versatile. A versatile weapon can be used to deal a different type of damage than that listed in the damage entry. This trait indicates the alternate damage type. For instance, a piercing weapon that is versatile S can be used to deal piercing or slashing damage. Interesting. So you can use it for piercing damage. You can use it for slashing damage. Cool. So the dagger in 5th edition, which is actually, the dagger is actually one of the more complicated weapons as far as properties are concerned in 5th edition. So we're going from one of the least complicated to one of the most complicated. So we go to the dagger. It is finesse, light, thrown, and then in parentheses range 20-60. Finesse, again, same thing. Finesse in 5th edition just means you can use your dex instead of your strength to attack with it. The big difference being you can use your dexterity for damage rolls in addition to just the attack rolls. So anyone in Pathfinder, anyone that is doing any sort of melee damage has to have a good strength score, because that is going to relate to how much damage you do. Always. You cannot build a character without a strength score if you want to do melee attacks. In 5th edition, my monk had a strength of 8. And while he wasn't a damage-dealing class, because that's not what monks were built to do, he never had problems doing the damage he was intended to do. And I have a blade singer that uses dexterity for theirs, and they can do lots of damage without even using their spellcasting. And again, that one also has I use strength as my dump score a lot. I don't know why. I really shouldn't. So yeah, that's finesse. Light only relates to two-weapon fighting, which is in order to do base two-weapon fighting, the weapon in your offhand has to have the light property. And that's all that ever matters for light. It doesn't change anything other than you can use it for 2-weapon fighting without having the dual weapon fighting or dual wielder feat, because that makes it so you don't need it. And throne is just that. Again, the difference being throne is range 20, 60. That's dagger versus dagger. Now, the regular dagger here in simple melee weapons has an additional thing, which makes it more complex. And complexity leads to customizability, which is the idea behind Pathfinder. Yes, complexity beats customizability, and that's why Pathfinder is so much better than everything else. Again, I don't think people that play Pathfinder actually sound like that. It's the argument that I'm talking about here. What I would say, though, is when you're actually playing the game, someone wielding a dagger in Pathfinder 2nd Edition versus someone wielding a dagger in 5th Edition Dungeons & Dragons has the exact same amount of options available to them, despite the dagger having more things. The only option that the dagger here can do is it can do slashing damage instead of piercing damage, which in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, I'm not as familiar with the monsters in that as I am with 5th Edition, might actually be something that's really, really useful. In 5th Edition, damage type isn't particularly useful unless you start dealing with the damage type feats that showed up in, I think it was either Xanathar's or Tasha's. I think it was Tasha's. And I like them. They're really cool. But that's really it, is sometimes you can change your 1d4 from piercing to slashing damage. And that's it. So for an entirely different system where you can just change that. Now, this is a bit of a misnomer, though, because the dagger in 5th Edition actually stands for a bunch of different weapons in Pathfinder. Wow, brain is just going. For example, the clan dagger, which is another different one, has 4 different weapons traits. They are agile, dwarf, parry, versatile, bee. So versatile bee, I'm going to go on the assumption versatile bee means bludgeoning. So now that, but also the Qatar, which has 3 different weapons traits, which are agile, deadly d6, and monk. All of those fit to the dagger. So while the dagger has 3 properties, for 3 different weapons that work the exact same way, they all require different proficiency because they are different weapons. So that makes them that much more common. Total number of different things, different traits that they have are, you have agile, finesse, thrown, versatile S. So that's 4. I'm going to put versatile B as the same as versatile F because it's technically the same trait. It just allows you to change one other thing. And I think counting them as different traits is doing a bit of a disservice for Pathfinder. I think that's just piling on a little bit much. So we have 4 so far. Dwarf makes 5. Parry makes 6. Deadly 6 makes 7. Monk makes 8. There are 8 total traits that coincide with what a dagger would do in 5th Edition. So for the same weapon, you have to know 8 more things. And depending on which one, some of them can't. Like, neither the clan dagger or the Qatar can be thrown, whereas all versions of the dagger in 5th Edition can be thrown. Dwarfs craft and use these weapons. That's all the trait means, is it's dwarven made. It doesn't give you any additional abilities. It doesn't change your proficiency or anything. It doesn't say dwarves get a +1 when wielding this, or dwarves have an easier to time. No, the entire description is it's made by dwarves. Okay, fine. Parry. What does parry mean? This weapon can be used defensively to block attacks. While wielding this weapon, if your proficiency with it is trained or better, you can spend an interact action to position your weapon defensively, getting a +1 circumstance bonus to AC until the start of your next turn. Okay, that does give you something different that you can't do with the base dagger, but it does require additional things. You have to be trained or better. Now, my understanding of how that system works is trained is your level 1 version of proficiency. In 5th edition, you're either proficient or you aren't. In Pathfinder, you have these like stacking versions of proficiency, and each one you get a bigger bonus. My understanding of Pathfinder is trained is level 1. The bare minimum of you knowing how to use this weapon is trained. So if you are trained, meaning if you can use the weapon, you can do parry. So that is something, it does give you one thing that you can't do with just the base dagger. Doesn't mean that that doesn't exist in 5th edition. They take care of it in different ways. But if we're just talking about the dagger, that would be something that we would say, okay, that gives you something to... Deadly D6. Deadly. On a critical hit, the weapon adds a weapon damage die of the listed size. Roll this after doubling the weapon's damage. This increases to 2 dice if the weapon has the greater striking rune, and 3 dice if it has a major striking rune. For instance, a rapier with greater striking rune deals 2d8 extra piercing damage on a critical hit. An ability that changes the size of the weapon's normal damage dice doesn't change the size of its deadly die. So this is an entirely new system where... when you do a critical hit, you do even more damage. Again, something that doesn't exist in 5th edition. Other than, again, there are ways to do more damage with critical hits, but it's built into class features rather than the weapon itself. And then finally, monk. And many monks learn to use these weapons. That's all it means. Many monks learn to use these weapons. Now, I'm going to assume, because I read the monk and I know it pretty well, or I did at one point. I've forgotten most of what I learned. It's been a year for folks. I'm going to assume monk has more than what it says here. It says many monks learn to use these weapons. That's the only thing it says under weapons trait. It gives you no reason why using a monk weapon would ever be useful. Just says, well, monks sometimes use these. It sounds like flavor. And it's the same thing for dwarf. I'm assuming there are feats, whether they are racial or class. They have like 3 different versions of feats in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Another thing that's just needlessly complicated. I would assume there are feats that interact with that particular thing, where monk weapons can do this. Now, monk weapons do exist in 5th edition, and the dagger can do that if you are a monk. Which, my understanding, the only way to use monks' weapons and get extra benefits is to be a monk, or to... They have a weird way to multi-class into monks in this, using feats, multi-classing in general. It's a way to do it. Again, I think it's overly complicated, but it works. So... having the monk thing tied to the weapon doesn't really provide any benefits, because you still have to be a monk. So a monk using a dagger, using a dagger, calm down. Thank you. Sorry, my computer certificate. A monk using just a regular dagger in Pathfinder 2nd Edition has less things they can do with that dagger than a monk in 5th edition did at D&D. Now, a monk using a Catar doesn't actually have anything more they can do, but it has the monk thing, so more likely than not, there will be things built into the class. However, a monk using a dagger already has the things built into the class. They can do Stunning Strike using the using the dagger, because stunning strike simply requires an attack using an unarmed strike or a monk weapon. However, a Pathfinder monk cannot throw a Katar. A 5e monk can throw a dagger. And it's effectively the same weapon. They just call it something different. It does the same damage. It costs 1 silver piece more, but it does the same type of damage. It is the same damage die. It has the same bulk. It uses it's under the same group of weapons, so it is a knife. Sickle is also in there for knife. I'm not sure why sickle is in there, because a sickle acts nothing like a knife in any way, shape, or form. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about complexity for complexity's sake. Yes, there are 8 different traits and 3 different weapons that do the exact same thing. But when you actually get down to, okay, what can and can't I do with this? The only difference between having 3 different things with 8 different traits is one of those 3 different things can parry. Whereas in 5th edition, the dagger can parry, you just have to have a feat for it. Or if you are a Battlemaster fighter, there's a parry maneuver you can use. So you either have to be a Battlemaster fighter or you need to take a feat for it. And that feat does a lot more than the parry in this does. The parry in this just increases your AC by 1. The parry in 5th edition actually increases your AC by your proficiency bonus. So that's up to a +6. And ACs are is a much smaller range in 5th edition. So numbers are inherently more valuable in 5th edition than 2nd edition, because the range is simply bigger in 2nd edition. So if you have a range between 10 is your base AC to I think 34 was the highest number I saw. That's 24 different numbers you could possibly have, where 24 is really the highest you'll ever get in 5th edition. 24. I think I've seen a 25 or a 26, but that's as high as it goes. So we're talking about half the range. Yes, numbers are slightly more important. Number increases to AC are slightly more important in 5th edition than they are in Pathfinder. Just due to bounded accuracy and other things like that. So, that's when I talk about complexity for complexity's sake, go, well, look, there's 3 different weapons that all do the same thing, but they have all these different features and things like that. Every single one of those things can be done in 5th edition, and none of them require 8 different traits. Having 8 different traits doesn't give you more choices. It just gives you more things to track. And that is only talking about things that are just considered simple weapons. There are more weapons that I would still classify as a dagger. Like a main gouge. A main gouge is a dagger. A main gouge is a type of dagger. But a main gouge is considered a martial weapon in this instead of a simple weapon, but it still does a d4 of piercing damage. It's still considered a knife, and it has agile, disarm, parry, finesse, and versatile S. We keep on going for more. You have the Kukri, which is another knife. Now this one does do a d6, so and slashing damage instead of piercing. So I would almost call this more of a short sword than I would that. But it's agile, finesse, and trip. So there's another new thing. Orc knuckle dagger, which does a d6 for some bizarre reason. Agile, disarm, orc. The sai, which my character Aether, my shadow monk, uses a sai. You want to know what he uses? He uses a dagger. That's the stat block I use. I just call it a sai. That's all I had to do. That's actually built into the rules themselves in the monk section. There's a little sidebar that says some monks use specialized version, like some use a special type of club, which is actually 2 pieces of wood fashioned together by a chain called nunchucks. Some of them use a specialized version of the longsword, which is a single-edged blade that's slightly curved, called a katana. And that's how they deal with things like that. The sai has agile, disarm, finesse, monk, versatile, B. All of these things can be done with the exact same thing, but they don't require you to have 7 different weapons that all require a different proficiency. because you don't ever get proficiency in all martial weapons. Like in 5th edition, that happens all the time. Yes, you have proficiency in martial weapons and simple weapons. And then there's a few classes where you have your proficiency in simple weapons and these particular weapons. But it's relatively rare that you will get, okay, you get this weapon, this weapon, this. But that's how 2nd edition Pathfinder works. Is you're like, well, you can get proficiency in this, and then you have to burn a feat to get proficiency in a specific weapon. So it's more difficult to wield a sai in, again, I wield a sai in 5th edition. That's what my monk uses. I didn't require any additional feats. I could do it right at level 1, despite the fact that my monk started at level 5 because the Adventure League, I was a DM and I ran shit tons of games, so it allowed you to build characters at higher level by... It was confusing, but it made sense. But right at first level, he could use a sai, and he could get it as part of his equipment kit. He didn't even have to buy it separate. That's what he did. So that's what I'm talking about when I say complexity for complexity's sake. That is 2nd edition in a nutshell. If you look at the trait section, it is two column pages of solid text. The properties section is 1 column, and I'm looking at it in, I don't think I have my, I'm looking at it on a computer screen, whereas the version of the core rulebook that I'm looking at for Pathfinder is literally the book layout in digital form, whereas I'm looking at the D&D Beyond page, which doesn't show it as pages. But if you look at, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. There are 32 different weapon traits. For weapon properties, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There are 11. There are triple the number of weapon properties. And yet, they don't, for the most part, they don't give you additional abilities that you can't do in 5th edition. They're simply there to be more complicated. Now, I know there are going to be people in the comments that go, well, no, because, parry again. You mentioned that parry lets you parry when you can't do that in 5th edition. Yeah, you can. And really, it's a +1 AC. It's a +1 bonus to your AC. And even that is confusing because it's not just a +1 bonus to your AC. It's a +1 circumstance bonus to your AC, which means depending on how you have your character built, that +1 bonus may be completely useless to you because circumstance bonuses don't stack. So, it might be for some characters, it can be useful. But if your character is built a different way, the parry feature is completely worthless to you because you already have a circumstance bonus to your AC. Like if you were behind cover or something, I believe that is a circumstance bonus. So parry, completely worthless to you. There are no features that don't have a use in some way, shape, or form. There are no properties that don't always have a use. Light is always going to give you an option of being able to dual wield it. And that's the only thing that light is ever used for. It doesn't change your attack rolls. It just means that you can dual wield it. That's what the light property is for. You can ignore it if you don't want to dual wield. But that's the only time that it's not useful. It doesn't require you to think about, okay, where in... as I'm positioned in the field here, does it make sense for me to use the light property? No, it's, are you dual wielding? Okay. The finesse always works that way. It doesn't change or anything like that. The thrown property always works that way. You can always throw the weapons. It doesn't change anything. Finesse and thrown work together so that if it's finesse and thrown, you can use your dexterity modifier to throw it. If it doesn't have finesse, you use your strength modifier to throw it. It's super, super simple. So anyway, the reason that I'm talking about complexity for complexity's sake in Pathfinder 2nd Edition is I did come to this kind of epiphany 30 minutes into the video, which is rules-heavy RPGs put the emphasis on the decisions you make outside of the game. They're significantly more important than the decisions you make in the game. And let me explain. And let me drink. I'm going to go back to D&D 3rd edition because I'm actually really familiar with that one. Not because I played the tabletop version of it, but because I played so many games that use the 3rd edition rules that I know them really, really well. And it's one of the reason that there were so many 3rd edition video games is because due to the fact that there were so many rules, it works really well as a video game because video games are based entirely on the idea of we will give you rules of what you can do. If they don't exist in the rules, you can't do them. Tabletop games in general are built on the idea we will give you enough rules so that you know the options you have, but nothing is off the table. The more rules you have, the closer you're going to get to a video game because a video game can only react to a situation that the programmers intended for you to do, to deal with. If you get to a situation where there's 3 bad guys and you're like, you know what? I want to try and tie the bad guys up so I don't have to kill them. Well, if they didn't, in a video game, if they didn't give you the option to tie them up, you can't. There's no way that you can do it. It's physically impossible because the game wasn't designed to deal with that. Even if you glitch the game somehow, the game does not have coding for tie them up. There's nothing that would allow you to do that. And that's kind of how 3rd edition works. And that's why it was so good for video games and why there were so many of them. So what I mean by they put the weight on the choices you make outside of combat. The choices you make when leveling up your character, when buying weapons for them, are going to dictate everything you do until your next level up. Because there is always a right answer when you build your character correctly. I've talked about this before. If you give people quote-unquote choices, but there's one that's always better, you're not giving them choices. You are giving them the illusion of choice. But if they do anything other than this one ability, they're always going to feel like they did something wrong. Especially if you balance the game around everyone making the quote-unquote right choice. Then not only do they feel like they're doing it wrong, but everything is going to be harder than them. Harder for them because the game was designed with the idea that everyone's always going to make the quote-unquote right choice, which is how balance in Pathfinder in 3rd edition was built, was that everyone, especially if you do something like Pathfinder Society is built around the idea that everyone has min-maxed their characters. I know this for a fact because I have played Pathfinder. I've played Pathfinder myself. I ran the Pathfinder program for one of the conventions I ran, and a lot of my friends were Pathfinder DMs. This is not just me not understanding. I've had people say, well, it's because you don't play. No, I know the game because I was around it constantly for years. Yes, Pathfinder Society is built around min-maxing. That's what it's designed to be. The people that wrote Pathfinder themselves said, yes, Pathfinder is a combat simulator. That's what it was designed for. Story and plot and stuff is meant to get you to the next combat. And I believe that was directly in relation to Pathfinder Society. But they made the statements in a broad enough context that they said, yeah, Pathfinder itself was a combat simulator. The choices you make at level up will dictate how your character goes through the rest of the game. The most important decisions you make in Pathfinder in D&D 3rd edition are at level up. That's why, and I'll bring this up because I bring this up every so often. I think it was Chris Perkins that talked about it. It was either Perkins or Merles. I can never remember which. We're talking about old school internet culture for D&D and things like that. Before we had Twitter and Reddit and things like that, and Discord servers, we had things called messaging boards. Messaging boards were very cool. And they had messaging boards and forums, is what they eventually evolved into. that were specifically for D&D. And back then, when you talked about D&D, you talked about character builds. Oh man, I've got a Fighter 3 Sorcerer 9 that is just killing it at my table. They took these feats and did this thing. Oh my god, really? I've got a Rogue 3 Assassin 4 Bladesinger 2, and I was able to do that because I took this feat that gave me the ability to spellcast at this level and use this customer. Oh man, I don't believe that. I'm actually a Hexblade 4 Bladesinger 6, and I've been having a really fun time with these feats. That's how you talked about D&D back then, because that was what you needed to know in order to understand how the character worked and understand the story and everything. Was the most important decisions you make in rule-heavy systems are at level up. Those will dictate everything you do from then on, because there's always a right answer. When you get to 5th edition, and this is something that Perkins found out within the first couple years of 5th edition being a thing, you would go to... there still are forums out there and message boards. They're not used a lot. They still exist. And then when you go to things like D&D Reddit, when you look at D&D YouTube, when you look at D&D Twitter, there's even D&D TikToks. There used to be D&D Vines before Vines became a thing of the past. Now what you see is, oh man, I have this really cool character. He's a barbarian that's, Path of the Beast, but he chose a bear totem because his father was actually saved by a bear when they were in the wilderness a long time ago. And so oh man, I'm playing this really cool assassin rogue that got into assassinating because his mother was actually killed and he was homeless, and he just discovered that he had this ability to kill people, and it made him money. So it kind of made sense for him. Oh man, I'm playing this monk who's actually an acolyte. And so what it is he actually goes around and finds enemies of the church, and he became a shadow monk specifically to be a more effective kind of enforcer for the church. And he started realizing, Perkins started realizing that when people talked about D&D, they weren't talking about builds anymore. They were talking about the stories they were telling. And the reason for that is in 5th edition, and RPGs like it that are more rules light, the most important decisions you make are made in the moment. And they will actually affect your other decisions, to the point where in every campaign I have run in 5th edition, I think I've had 3 like total Kukri campaigns. And even in the Adventurers League, you would see this happen, despite the fact that it's full of min-maxing. People make choices on level up based on what has happened to their character, not based on statistics. And this happens almost every game. Like in one of my Wednesday night games right now, I had a Blood Hunter start taking levels in Paladin, simply because throughout the game, their character had been getting more and more into... The Dark Lady is the goddess of death in my campaign setting. And because it was a ghost hunter, I think is what the blood hunters that are really into just that skirting the line of death and life. Ghost Slayer, that's it. Order of the Ghost Slayer. His character had just really, really started to understand and respect the goddess of death, to the point that he wanted to dedicate his life to it. And so he chose to become a paladin. On a completely different spectrum, I had a fighter gunslinger that also went paladin for a completely different god. For completely different reasons. But that's why it was either paladin or cleric. I can never remember which. But that's... You see this constantly in 5th edition games, where people will start making level up decisions entirely based on what's happened to their character, because the choices they make inside the game while they are playing are the most important choices, and they will influence the other choices they make, like what they do at level up. And when you get past the complexity for complexity's sake and the things like that, and you really look at the idea of rules-heavy games highly incentivize making the right choices at level up. Rules-light games highly incentivize making the right choice in the middle of the game. You start to understand, especially for people that don't understand how someone could like a game like that. Like, I know a lot of people that really, really love 3rd edition and cannot for the life of them understand how anyone could ever play 5th edition, because you can just do anything. There's no rules. It's so boring. Well, no. It's because you are incentivized to make meaningful choices in the story that allow you to make whatever choices you want in character advancement and the things like that. But the most important choices you make are in the story. And I know a lot of people, for me, for the longest time, I couldn't understand why people liked 3rd edition so much and like Pathfinder so much. Like, oh, it's the most amazing thing. It's not. It's needlessly complicated. It's really easy to make a bad character. Especially in D&D 3rd edition, 3.5 is a little bit nicer. But in base 3rd edition, by 5th level, you could have a completely pointless character. Like, there's absolutely no possible way for your character to do anything in combat. Your modifiers were not high enough to be able to hit anything. Your skills were not high enough to ever succeed at any of the tasks you tried to attempt. It was literally, you were just dead weight for the party. And it wasn't hard to do. You just had to not spend your skill points optimally. Not even just not effectively. If you didn't spend them optimally, like something that I ran into when I first started playing was taking skills that are not class skills for your character can burn you really hard because they cost double the number of skill points. And when you're initially picking your skills, you want to make sure you're taking the right skills. There were certain skills that just didn't do anything. Depending on your dungeon master. And there were tons of skills too. It was really annoying just how many different things. Like you had move silently, and then you also had stealth or something similar to that. There were 2 different things that both related to being stealthy. And they were almost interchangeable, but they weren't. And it was really annoying because you couldn't really specialize in one of them. Because in general, if you're going to be stealthy, you were going to be using both of them. Which annoyed the hell out of me. Because it's like, well, why give me 2 different skills when the only time you're ever going to use them is in conjunction with each other? Well, it's for more realism. Whatever. So anyway, for the longest time, once I started playing 5th edition, I could not understand why anyone would ever want to play 3rd edition. I'm like, it is so rules bloated. It is so complicated. It is not fun to play. I actually sat down. I'm like, you know what? I want to build a Pathfinder character. I want to physically build one. And I sat down and I started trying to build it, and I gave up halfway through because I'm like, oh dear God. It would be slightly easier if I'd been using my physical copy instead of my digital one, because first things first, I didn't know there was a back button in Acrobat Reader because it wasn't enabled by default. Adobe, get on that. Enable the back button by default. And to build a character in Pathfinder, you have to flip between like 5 or 6 different areas constantly to be able to understand, because you will reference, okay, you have to do this, which is referenced in this part, and then you have to go here, but it's referenced in this part and this part. And to build a first level character, you have to go to 5 or 6 different places, and you can't just go one, finish that, go to the next, because it will reference something else, and something else will affect this, and so they're all interconnected, and so you have to just constantly flip through the book. And in a PDF, when you don't know that there's a back button, it's a pain in the ass to do that, because the bookmarks, the bookmarks that are built in are really nice, but it's still a massive, like 400 or 500 page book. So even the bookmarks themselves are still going to require you go to the bookmark and then flip through pages and things, or you have to memorize the different page numbers, which again, my memory is really bad, so I can't remember any of that stuff. So I just gave up. I'm like, this is so needlessly complex and is so unfun. And the reason I wanted to build a character was because I was going to build a character and then I was going to run it through some scenarios that I just made up myself just to get a better understanding of what it's like to actually play the game. Again, playing with other people is different than running it through scenarios. But for someone like me that's been doing this for thousands and thousands of hours, I can get a decent idea of at least how it's supposed to play. Not how it actually plays, how it's supposed to play by just building a character and then running it through a bunch of scenarios. So that's what I wanted to do, because I'm like, you know what? There's so much about Pathfinder 2nd Edition that seems cool to me. Like, there's so many really interesting, like the stances for monks. I think that's such a cool idea. And the thing that got me into Pathfinder 2nd Edition again was I was looking through. They have a card-based feat or archetype or something you can take, so you can attack people with playing cards in Pathfinder 1st Edition. There's actually an entire class, subclass built around it. I'm like, oh my god, I totally want to play this class. And I'm like, do they have the same thing in 2nd Edition? Spoiler alert, they don't right now. 2nd Edition is still new. I want them to put that in because I love the idea of throwing cards as weapons. I think it's cool. Now, in Pathfinder 1st Edition, it was pointless. I was so upset when I went to look at it. I'm like, oh, I so want to play this. And it's such a suboptimal build that you can't do it. Like, it's built in such a way that you have to use your actions in a certain way, and you can't... Like, most of the benefit from it would be from the idea of, oh, look, I get to throw cards, but you'll do less damage than everyone. You have a lot less options. Like, it's really sad that I'm like, oh, this is so cool, and you can never use it because, oh, it doesn't work. But yeah, so I wanted to get into Pathfinder 2nd Edition, but it just... There's so much to learn, and the barrier to entry for rules-heavy games is so high that they will never, ever be as popular as 5th Edition or any other system that is rules light. You want to know why World of Darkness has been picking up steam? It's because it's not a very rules-heavy system. It isn't. There are some complexities to the game, don't get me wrong, but it is not an incredibly complex system. Definitely not a 3rd Edition or Pathfinder style complexity to it. But, again, if you're willing to put the time and the effort into learning the system, you will be rewarded greatly in the game by making the right decisions during character creation. Whatever... character creation, and then when you level up your character, whatever decisions you make then are going to play out extensively over the campaign, and choosing the right or wrong options there are going to massively change how you play the game. But it's all going to be based on the choices you make at character creation. Once you're actually playing the game, you're almost on autopilot, because the choices you made at character creation and at level up are going to dictate what you do, because you put your skills into a certain skill set for 3rd Edition. So you have the things you can and you do, and you have the things that you can't do, and it's very clear and very easy. And the things that you can do, you do very well, and you're really not going to fail that often if you've built your character right. And then when you get into combat, I made that thing about I can't remember who it was now. The guy that said that he was leaving Pathfinder 2nd Edition because it was always the same. That's because it emphasizes choices made at level up. Once you make those choices, you're going to do the same thing every single combat because you've built your character to do that. That's why you made those two choices. And that can feel very empowering for some people, because they can go, okay, if I do this, this, and this, then I can do all these other things, and they're always going to work. In 5th Edition, the choices you make at level up are important. Don't get me wrong, but in general, the choices you make in the middle of the game are going to be significantly more impactful to what you do. And because you are not limited as much, because there aren't as many rules and you have a few more options as far as your choices are concerned, if you make the quote unquote wrong choice in 5th edition, it doesn't mean that your character can't play anymore. And it doesn't mean that you can't play the way you want. You may not succeed quite as often as before, but you'll find that you have different things that you can succeed at, and it can change your play style and let you try new choices. And it's one of the reasons why I like 5th edition so much. I don't like doing a bunch of prep work. When I was in school, a lot of my teachers love me. But I like to say they hated me because I never did my homework. I stopped doing homework in like 7th grade. By the time I got to high school, like I did enough homework in 7th grade to make it look like I cared. By the time I got to high school, I just stopped doing it. And I had an English teacher once. She goes, Jody, I don't understand. You're really smart. Thank you. I'm not sure why you can't understand that. I'm pretty sure that was an insult. No, let me finish. You're really smart, but you got a B in my class. I'm passing. I'm not even like barely passing. A B is passing pretty well. Like I did it. But you could have an A. Okay. Why don't you do this, this, and this? I said, because it's more work. She's like, yeah, but you could really easily have an A. It's not that you can't do that. I said, yeah, but I have other things I want to do. Yeah, but you could have an A. I said, I don't care. But this is really going to affect where you can go to college. Okay. And again, this teacher was really upset that I wasn't applying myself as much in her class. And I'm like, that's fine. Are you mad because I don't understand? Because I can sit here and I can tell you all the themes of this book, and I can sit here and I dissect this sentence. To be perfectly honest, I've learned more about English. This was an English teacher. I've learned more about English in my French class than I will ever learn in your class. So sorry to point that out, but you really don't learn your native language very well until you learn a second. And you learn a whole crap ton more. Like I didn't know what conjugation was until I until I started learning French. And then it blew my mind. But anyway, she used to get really, really mad at me. And she's like, I don't understand why you won't just apply yourself. I said, I'm applying myself. I'm in the jazz band. I'm in the show choir, which I got kicked out of like 2 or 3 times because the popular kids didn't like me. I'm in a jazz combo. I run my own Dixieland combo. I'm in every show we do. I'm a section leader in marching band. I don't understand. Like, I am applying myself. I'm just not applying myself in English. I'm doing enough to pass the class. I know everything in there. I actually had a math teacher that stopped grading homework. Once he stopped grading homework, I shot up to the highest grade in the class because I just didn't do homework, but I knew this stuff. And he came up to me one day after a test, and he goes, Jody, I want you to solve this differential. It was for calculus. He goes, Jody, I need you to solve this differential equation for me. I said, okay. He said, you can't write anything down. Okay. And so he gave me this somewhat complex. It wasn't super bad, but it was complex enough. And he just rattles it off. And I go, okay. And I took a couple seconds and said, x equals this. It's like, okay, you don't have to show your work on your tests anymore. I know that you know it. And what was happening was I was losing points on tests because I would just write the answer. Because I would look at the differential equation and I would just go, oh, this is the answer. And it would take me longer to write everything out than it would for me to just go, oh, do. And so he stopped requiring me to show my work because he knew I was doing it. He knew I wasn't cheating. That's just not what I do. So I don't enjoy prep work. Even for when I run D&D or run games in general, in between sessions, I don't do a ton of prep work. When I'm building a campaign, I do a ton of prep work beforehand where I build the world, I build the characters, the major players and everything like that. I give them very well-defined motivations and personalities and the things like that. And then when I'm actually running the game, I know every one of these characters. I know how they're going to react to every single situation because I've built them and I know their motivations. So all I have to do is have them react to what the players do. And in general, most of my prep work nowadays is I build maps, and then I'll build more NPCs or I'll build more other things for them to interact with. But by the time the players are actually playing, I like to really be in the game. And I like to be very, very reactionary to what the players are doing. So I'm not building every single NPC they ever encounter. I will build a lot of NPCs on the fly, but I have like archetypes. I guess I should say that I have archetypes I've designed when I'm building the game itself of different kinds of people that they might thing. But most of the stuff I do in the game, I do spur of the moment. I'm a very improvisational dungeon master. It's one of the reasons why during the last charity event that I ran, one of my DMs just didn't show up for their slot. And so I improvised their entire game. I had nothing but a small paragraph they had given me of their description of what was going to happen. And I made up an entire 4-hour session for players on the spot. After I had just finished DMing my own session. I was tired as hell too. I then played in another game that I fell asleep in on camera a couple of times because I was so exhausted. I'd been up for like 18 hours at that point. But anyway, because that's what I do. And so 5th edition really appeals to me because a lot of it can be done in the moment. It doesn't penalize you for not making the right choices at character creation. It actually incentivizes you to make your choices in the game, in the moment. Whereas a game like Pathfinder or 3rd edition heavily incentivizes you to put the time and effort to learn the system, put the time and effort to build your character correctly, and then you get to experience it. But the most important decisions you're going to make are at character creation and at level up. The decisions you make during the game are not going to be anywhere near as impactful. And once you kind of understand that that's the difference between the two systems, is one emphasizes making decisions in the moment and one emphasizes making decisions outside of the game, you start to understand a lot better. The reason I think so many people claim that Pathfinder is so much more tactical, that's what it is. It's more tactical. All the different options give you so many more things. No, they don't. I've already shown you it actually gives you less ability to do things. The reason they call it more tactical is because technically it is. Because when you make your decisions at character creation and when you make them at level up, they will impact more decisions because they force you along a certain style of play. Whereas in 5th edition, the choices you make at level up don't matter nearly as much because you can offset them by what you do in the game itself. And so when you have decisions that you make that don't feel as valuable because you can kind of make up for them, people will see that as like, well, then those decisions didn't matter because I can make up for them in a certain mindset. And so they will claim that Pathfinder is more tactical because the decisions you make at level up are incredibly important. You make the wrong decision at level up, you can throw your character away. And again, I've seen this happen in 3rd edition games. Again, Pathfinder 2e is too new for me to really know a whole lot about it, but that is what 3rd edition is. And I'm not saying that's a wrong way to play. That is a way to play. And when you understand that that's what people enjoy about 3rd edition, whether they are conscious of it or is a subconscious thing, that is the draw of rules-heavy systems in general, is if you understand the system, you can build your character. It's kind of like you program your character and then you let it loose. Whereas 5th edition, you need to be invested at all times. You need to understand what's happening in the moment, because the choices that you make, the offhand choice that you're not thinking about in the moment, can have drastic consequences later on that are going to change how you play your character. And there are a lot of people, like, again, the reason I like 5th edition and other rules-light systems is because it lets me do what I want. Again, I found a really cool build for Pathfinder where you could play a card thrower, a death dealer. You get to throw cards to kill people. It's super cool. I love it. and it's not a viable build. I went through all the different, because forums still exist. I actually went through a bunch of Pathfinder forums to look up, hey, is this a build? Can you do this? And every one of them went, yeah, no, it's not worth it. It's really cumbersome. You're generally going to have a low attack bonus. You're not going to be able to do most of the cool stuff that you can do. It's just not. It's not fun. So don't take that feat. There are better things that you can do with those with your feats. And it really upset me. However, in 5th edition, I have built a card throwing character. I have them. I actually have them in D&D Beyond. Go away. I know. In D&D Beyond, I'm actually going to, because I can't remember what I named them. Julius Eagleton is the name of the character. And they're a Battlemaster fighter that attacks by throwing cards. Now, the cards I have are darts. They're just darts. I just call them throwing cards because you can do that in 5th edition. You can just rename things, and that's perfectly fine. It's in the player's handbook. It's not even an optional rule in the Dungeon Master's Guide or something that was introduced in Tosh or something. No, in the player's handbook, it says, yeah, rename things. It's not that big a deal. If you want to be a card throwing, fighter, do it. You are more than welcome to. So I built that. And it's actually a good character. I can do a lot of really cool, fun things. I haven't had a chance to play it because I'm the forever DM. I never get to play. But one day I want to play the character because it's a cool character. And I get to throw cards. Like, that's all it is. And I love that that's a thing that I can do. And you can do that in 5th edition, and you can't do that in Pathfinder or 2nd edition Pathfinder or 3rd edition D&D or 3.5. You can't make a card thrower. And it's mostly because there are too many rules in it that don't allow you to do it. So, anyway, that's my little rant for today. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Like I said, once I understood the idea of why people enjoy Pathfinder and that, I don't have the vehement distaste for rules-heavy games that I used to. I still don't like them. And Pathfinder 2nd Edition I find especially abhorrent. Particularly because they jumped off the deep end with adding just more and more complexity while trying to emulate 5th edition, and so they just completely lost the point. Which I find simultaneously hilarious and insulting. Yeah, like now that I understand that, like I probably could I could even play a Pathfinder 2nd edition game. I probably wouldn't like it as much. And I would need a very special kind of DM that wouldn't mind the fact that I'm not as big a fan of character creation being the big all end all of decisions. Yeah, I understand the systems now a lot better. I understand the motivations behind them, and it gives you a better respect for the system and for the people that play the system, and I think that's important. So I hope that's what you guys get from this incredibly long thing, because yeah, that was what I hoped. This is how my brain works, especially I've been dealing with really bad panic attacks for the past couple of days, and this is how my brain works when I'm in an anxiety fueled fugue, is I just leap from topic to topic to topic to topic to topic, and it drives me nuts. But yeah, this helps. Anyway, that's all for me today. I will see you guys tomorrow. All right? Bye-bye.